Spy versus engineer. A very obvious and clear feud between two classes. The engineer builds things, and spy destroys them. As a spy, you are equipped with the tools to destroy an engineer nest. You can disguise, making the buildings treat you as if you're on their team. You can turn invisible to reach the nest unnoticed. You can end the engineer instantly with one foul flick of your knife. You can place sappers on his buildings, disabling them and eating away at their health unless the sapper is removed. And finally, spy has a gun. Maps in TF2 are the static thing. No matter how many times you play them, they are of course the same map. Except for Hydra, am I right? Sure, some doors and spawn locations may change depending on how the round progresses, but it's always the same.
Nope.
As Spy, or any class for that matter, you could develop certain strategies on certain maps depending on their layout, especially as Engineer. But with an Engineer nest, you'll have no idea what you'll get. You have to improvise. Sometimes it's easier for you, sometimes you have to be craftier. Buildings are also solid objects, which makes them obstacles. You can't mindlessly attack an Engineer nest and get away with it, unless the Engineer is also branded. You have to think of a plan of attack. But the biggest advantage you have over the Engineer as Spy in a fight is that you are always the one who starts the fight, meaning you choose when the fight happens. This allows you to do two things: take a moment to study the Engineer's behavior as well as his setup, and time an attack to your advantage. So first, let's start with the first step of attacking an Engineer nest: the planning. First, you'll want to judge how smart you think the Engineer is. There are multiple factors into this. If the Engineer is wearing good hats, is constantly moving around, and has his buildings spread out and placed smartly, you can assume that the Engineer is experienced and will take some thinking to take out. If the Engineer has no hats, stands still very often, and has his buildings bunched together, you can assume he's going to be very easy to game end. If you're using stock cloak and want to wait and time your attack, hot tip, stand on the dispenser, now you have a discount cloak and dagger. The collision of a building will treat the Engineer who built it the same way as it treats you. However, the rest of his teammates are unaffected by the collision of the building, so if you're using the dispenser tactic, you may need to move slightly when somebody uses the dispenser to avoid detection. Another secret tactic.
See this? Don't use it. It's bad.
The other part of being able to choose when to attack is to time them. Sometimes it's as simple as waiting until the Engineer starts hitting his sentry to stab him and sap the sentry, or waiting until he comes under fire from the rest of your team to then attack him as well to overwhelm him. Sometimes you'll find the nest and the prime opportunity is already right there in front of you to snatch up within seconds, and sometimes the Engineer will leave his buildings completely unattended for a free sap. I should also mention that you should turn on fast weapon switch. This allows you to swap weapons much quicker by pressing the number keys on your keyboard rather than the scrolling system. This allows you to stab an Engineer, then quickly pull out your sapper to sap a sentry before it has time to turn around and shoot you, since a level 3 sentry can literally kill you in less than a second. But you do need to be careful to not try too hard to wait for the quote-unquote perfect opportunity. If you take too long, you're just a useless spy sitting there doing nothing, and sometimes a key opportunity won't present itself quick enough. You should only wait around about 30 seconds max before making your move, otherwise you might as well be doing something else, such as destroying other players' spines. If the opportunity doesn't present itself, you'll need to create it yourself. You can't wait forever until there's a perfect opportunity. You need to take risks. Decloaking and sapping the sentry to then open fire on the Engineer or the sentry itself to try and kill the Engineer or the sentry is an aggressive but useful tactic when the Engineer is caught off guard. Sometimes it's best just to go for one or the other, the Engineer or the buildings. If you kill the Engineer first, of course it's an easy sap as long as another player doesn't get you killed, but of course that leaves the sentry without a dedicated Engineer to repair it, allowing just a little spam to take it out with ease. If you destroy the buildings first, now the Engineer has to spend time rebuilding his nest, and your team can advance forward, and you can single out the Engineer while he's vulnerable. Killing both is of course the best option, but sometimes you need to leave one standing. It's this risk versus reward dilemma. What you think is best for your team and for yourself. A good tactic to take out the buildings is to sap them, then bait the engineer into trying to kill you, distracting the engineer for long enough that he isn't able to save his nest. You can easily get away with this if done right, but sometimes you'll need to aggressively fire a revolver shot just to finish off a building in time.
This is why they made the bully hunters for shit like this.
Sometimes, you could also just kill the engineer by baiting him out of the safety of his own sentry to some revolver shots to the face or a crafty trick stab. Sometimes you can pull both off at the same time, depending on how big of a risk you want to take, but it's up to your own judgment and confidence. Another thing you should know is that when a sapper is removed from a sentry, the sentry is 0.5 seconds before it becomes active again, which gives you a small window to reapply the sapper when close to the sentry. But the buildings aren't always the thing you want to destroy, because sometimes you can use them to your advantage. As mentioned before, you can stand on a dispenser while cloaked for a discount cloak and dagger, which is using an engineer's buildings to your advantage. Sometimes it even pays to not sap the dispenser for a few seconds to refill your health and ammo quickly. You can also stand on buildings which you can use to set an engie up for a trick stab when he comes to repair it. But then we have teleporters, which can open up so many opportunities for mind games. One well-known trick is the telefrag. This strategy is known to involve going to the enemy spawn, sapping the entrance, then standing on it, and waiting for the engineer to remove it. Hopefully the engineer will stand on his exit when removing the sapper, and you telefrag him under the safety of your disguise. This of course is a gamble, since this trick is easy to avoid by just simply not standing on the exit. So only use this if you're confident that the engineer you're up against is inexperienced. And if the engineer is just turtling in a corner, you may just be able to skip the sapping part. However, what a lot of people don't realize is that there are more ways to telefrag an engineer or use a teleporter to your advantage. If you see the teleporter is getting upgraded, you could also just go for a telefrag since the engineer most likely won't be ready for you. And sometimes, you can just take the teleporter without sapping it. This will result in one of two things. Either you will get lucky and telefrag the engineer or another player, or you will come through and since you'll have the teleporter particles coming off you, your disguise will be much more convincing, and you'll also likely be quite close to the engie. If you've watched my disguises video, and you have an understanding of acting, you can make your act very convincing. On a big map, however, where teleporters are very effective, it pays to take out the entrance by doing a sap and shoot on the entrance, which will almost always work. This will make the enemy team have to walk all the way from spawn, wasting their time and doing your team a huge favour, and it will also result in this.
Okay, so the spy just destroyed my teleporter entrance, and I can't go back to repair it because otherwise the spy's going to come back and save my stuff while I'm gone. But if I can't get my team to the front lines quickly, then it means I'm... God damn it!
But then we have another dilemma. Multiple engineers. Sometimes, of course, there are multiple construction workers working together. This will make your planning have to be a lot craftier, unless they're all clearly brain dead. If the engineers put all their sentries close together instead of spreading them out, you can assume that they're inexperienced. Sometimes it's good to single an engineer out and kill him, get away, and return to attack the other. This can also work if one of the engineers leaves his buildings and the other engineer has to attend to both of them. It becomes the same as before, except there are just two sentries you need to work around, but one engineer will most likely not be able to save both. But what about another form of teamwork? The pyro. When a pyro is involved, it becomes much harder to take out a nest on your own, so fight fire with fire. Except don't do that literally because that just creates more fire that makes literally no sense. But the point I'm making is respond with their teamwork with more teamwork of your own. Simply being able to kill the engineer when he drops his guard will leave the buildings without an engineer to repair them, so even if the pyro removes the sapper with the homewrecker, your team can easily finish the job. Other team-based methods also involve coordinating a sap. This is often seen in comp games, but is still very doable and casual. Tell your team to get ready to do a push, and as soon as you get a sap on the sentry, tell your team to go in and hopefully overwhelm the engineers and other teams' defenses. Multiple spies can also work, especially with spread out buildings. Now there is a spy per engineer, just hoping that the other spy does know what they're doing. Or sometimes, It is even a good idea just to use a different class to take out a sentry. 2 direct hit rockets are enough to take out a level 3 within a second. You can use grenades and stickies to spam out the sentry while safely under cover. Damn! A push with an uber-charged heavy is also generally enough to take out a sentry. Point is, Spy isn't the only class capable of taking out sentries, and sometimes if Spy isn't working, you'll just need to learn to adapt to the situation and play another class. Sorry Spy mains, but it's true. Playing other classes is good. But the big underlying thing in a Spy versus Engineer battle is that it's not mainly about who is more skilled, but who is smarter. The Engineer will set up his nest and you need to figure out a way to take it out. And with so many varying anti-spy strategies that Engineers can use, it keeps these fights fresh and interesting every time. Some Engineer fights are a piece of piss. Either you found them in an easy to take advantage of situation, that sounds very wrong now that I think about it, or they're ready for you when you come. A good Engineer player will always keep the potential of a spy attack in the back of his head. It's up to you how you execute said attack and when. Vary up your methods of attack and use next level mind games. It is a thing called spy psychology. Be crafty and smart. Observe the Engineer and take him out with a plan. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this video puts you in a good mindset for how to destroy Engineer nests. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell. It helps me out a lot. I also have a Discord server if you want to talk to me there, and a Twitter you can follow. Anyway, thanks for watching, and goodbye.